Welcome back, everyone. In the previous lecture, we discussed the taxonomy of the Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex. We learned how MTBC belongs to the genus Mycobacterium, explored the different members of the complex, and appreciated why distinguishing these organisms is important for epidemiological, veterinary, and clinical perspectives. Today, we will build on that foundation by moving beyond classification and into the next essential aspect of MTBC. Understanding taxonomy tells us who these organisms are. Our next topic will help us understand how they behave, how we identify them in the laboratory, and why these characteristics are so important for diagnosis, patient management, and tuberculosis control. So, with that background in mind, let's begin today's discussion. Every property that we will discuss has direct implications for patient care, lab diagnosis, infection control, and even drug development. In today's lecture, we will proceed in three logical steps. First, we will discuss the morphology and growth characteristics of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. These includes its microscopic appearance, unique cell wall composition, acid fastness, slow growth, colony morphology, and spatial cultural characteristics. These features explain why TB diagnosis is different from most other bacterial infections. Second, we will understand the pathogenesis and the infection cycle. We will follow the organism from inhalation of infectious droplet nuclei through its interaction with alveolar macrophages, intracellular survival, granuloma formation, latent infection, and finally progression to active tuberculosis. Understanding this sequence is essential for appreciating why tuberculosis remains one of the leading infectious diseases worldwide. Third, we will examine the host immune response. Unlike many bacterial infections that are cleared primarily by antibodies, tuberculosis is controlled predominantly by cell mediated immunity. We will discuss macrophages, dendritic cells, CD4 positive T lymphocyte cytokines such as interferon gamma and TNF alpha, and the formation of granulomas. We will also understand why granulomas are both protective and potentially damaging to host tissues. As we move through each section, I would encourage you not to memorize isolated facts. Instead, try to connect morphology with lab diagnosis, pathogenesis with clinical manifestations, and immunology with the disease progression and vaccine strategies. These concepts are repeatedly tested in MBBS, MD, DNB, DM entrance examinations, and they form the basis of modern tuberculosis research. So, let's begin with the first topic, morphology and growth characteristics of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Understanding the organism structure is the key to understanding every laboratory technique we use for its detection. So, after this lecture, you will find the answers of the questions like why does Ziehl-Neelsen staining work only after heating? The another question is why does Mycobacterium tuberculosis take weeks to grow while E. coli grows overnight? And why is cell-mediated immunity more important than antibodies in tuberculosis? So for MBBS students, the exam parts are morphology, acid fastness, growth characteristics, and virulence factors. For MD-DNB, the important exam parts are cell wall lipids, intracellular survival mechanisms, granuloma biology, immune evasion, and laboratory implications. Let us now begin with one of the most important sections in tuberculosis microbiology, the morphology and growth characteristics. Many students tend to memorize these features as isolated facts. However, I want you to think differently. Every morphological characteristic of M. tuberculosis explains an important aspect of its laboratory diagnosis, virulence, or treatment. If you understand the why behind each feature, you will never have to memorize it again. Slender acid-fast bacillus. The first point is that Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a slender, straight, or slightly curved acid-fast bacillus. It measures approximately 2 to 4 micrometers in length and 0.2 to 0.5 micrometers in width, making it a relatively thin rod-shaped bacterium. Now the most important word here is acid-fast. Unlike most bacteria, M. tuberculosis has a cell wall rich in mycolic acids, glycolipids, and complex waxes. These long chain lipids make the bacterial surface highly hydrophobic and prevent ordinary aqueous stains from entering the cell efficiently. This is why gram staining is unreliable for M. tuberculosis. Sometimes the bacilli may appear weakly gram positive or show gram neutral staining, but gram stain is not recommended for diagnosis. Instead, we use Gill-Nielsen staining, quinine staining, or fluorescent aramine rhodamin staining. The term acid first means that once stained with carbalfuchsin, the bacilli retain the red dye even after treatment with acid alcohol, a property that reflects the unique lipid-rich cell wall. Clinical pearl acid fastness is not just a staining characteristic, it is a direct consequence of the organism's cell wall composition, which also contributes to persistence against drying, disinfectants, and many antibiotics. Now, coming to the second point, non-motile. The organism is non-motile, it possesses no flagella, so it cannot actively move. Its spread within the body occurs through infected macrophages, lymphatic channels, blood, or respiratory droplets, not by bacterial motility. Non-spore forming. Another important point is that Mycobacterium tuberculosis is non-spore forming. Students often wonder how tuberculosis survives for prolonged periods despite not producing spores. The answer lies in its lipid-rich cell wall again, metabolic dormancy, and intracellular persistence. These mechanisms provide long-term survival without true spore formation. Obligate aerob. This means it requires oxygen for growth. This explains why pulmonary tuberculosis predominantly affects the upper lobes of the lungs, particularly the apical and posterior segments where oxygen tension is highest. This single microbiological fact beautifully correlates with clinical pathology. Capsule. Traditionally, we say that M. tuberculosis does not possess a true polysaccharide capsule like Streptococcus pneumoniae or Klebsiella pneumoniae. However, advanced research has shown that it has an outer capsule-like layer composed of polysaccharides, proteins, and lipids, which contributes to immune evasion and interaction with host cells. Therefore, for MBBS examinations, remember non-capsulated but at postgraduate level, be aware of these capsule-like outer layer. Serpentine cord formation. One of the classic microscopic features is serpentine cord formation. Instead of lying randomly, virulent strains often align in long rope-like bundles called serpentine cords. This phenomenon occurs because of cord factor, chemically known as trehalose dimycolate. Cord factor is one of the major virulence factors of M. tuberculosis. It inhibits neutrophil migration, interferes with host immune responses, promotes granuloma formation, and contributes to tissue damage. Historically, cord formation has even been used as an indicator of virulence in culture. So, the Viva question may be which virulence factor is responsible for serpentine cord formation, that is, the alignment in long rope-like bundles? The answer will be trehalose dimycolate, that is the cord factor. Now coming to the growth characteristics. Slow growth. M. tuberculosis is one of the slowest growing pathogenic bacteria. Its generation time is approximately 18 to 24 hours. Compare this with Escherichia coli, whose generation time is only about 20 minutes. Why is M. tuberculosis so slow? Because synthesizing its highly complex lipid-rich cell wall requires considerable energy and time, resulting in slow replication. This slow growth has important clinical implications. Patients often require prolonged therapy for at least 6 months, and laboratory cultures also require extended incubation periods. Now, culture on Lowenstein Jensen medium. Colonies usually appear after 3 to 8 weeks. This prolonged incubation is one of the reasons why molecular methods such as CBNAT and TrueNAT have transformed tuberculosis diagnosis. Students should remember the classical colony description: rough, tough, and buff. Rough refers to irregular colony surface. Tough indicates that colonies are difficult to emulsify because of the lipid-rich cell wall, and buff describes the characteristic cream or beige coloration. This phrase is extremely important in undergraduate and postgraduate examinations both. Now coming to the lipid culture, MGIT 960. Modern laboratories increasingly use MGIT 960, which stands for Mycobacterial Growth Indicator Tube 960. Unlike solid media, MGIT is a liquid culture system that detects oxygen consumption as the bacilli grow. Because bacterial growth occurs more rapidly in liquid medium, positivity is often obtained within 7 to 21 days, depending on the bacillary load, compared to 3 to 8 weeks in LJ medium. MGIT has significantly reduced turnaround time and is now considered a standard culture method in many tuberculosis reference laboratories. However, remember that culture remains the gold standard for confirming tuberculosis and performing drug susceptibility testing. Before we move to the next slide, let us summarize the key concepts. So, TM tuberculosis is a slender, acid-fast bacillus, non-motile, non-spore-forming, and an obligate aerobe. Its lipid-rich cell wall explains acid fastness, slow growth, and environmental resistance. Cord factor produces characteristic serpentine cords, and it is an important virulence determinant. It has a generation time of 18 to 24 hours, making it one of the slowest growing bacterial pathogens. On Lowenstein-Jensen medium, colonies appear after 3 to 8 weeks and classically described as rough, tough, and buff. And MGIT 960 shortens the detection time to approximately 7 to 21 days, improving diagnostic efficiency. And now, what is the gold standard method for confirming tuberculosis and for performing drug susceptibility testing? Answer in the comment box. So, high yield viva questions, you may write it down. Why is M. tuberculosis called acid fast? Number 2, why is gram staining not useful for tuberculosis? Number 3, why does pulmonary TB commonly involve the upper lobes or posterior lobes? What is cord factor? Mention its chemical name and function. Describe the classical colony morphology of M. tuberculosis on LJ medium. Why is MGIT 960 faster than solid culture? What is the generation time of M. tuberculosis? Number 8, why does TB require prolonged antimicrobial therapy? This is probably the most important slide in the entire microbiology section because almost every unique characteristic of Mycobacterium tuberculosis originates from its cell wall. Rather than describing it as a list of components, we can learn it as a story from the innermost layer to the outermost and correlating the structure with the function. So we come to what I consider the heart of Mycobacterium tuberculosis microbiology, its cell wall architecture. If you understand the cell wall thoroughly, you will understand almost everything about this organism. Why is it acid fast? Why it grows slowly? Why it survives inside the macrophages? Why it is naturally resistant to many antibiotics? Its intracellular persistence. Why antitubercular therapy is prolonged, and even how drugs like isoniazid and ethambutol work. In other words, the cell wall is not merely a structural component, it is the organism's major weapon for survival and virulence. A unique cell envelope. Unlike typical gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis possesses a complex multi-layered cell envelope. It contains features of gram-positive bacteria such as thick peptidoglycan layer, but is surrounded by an additional lipid-rich outer layer, making it unique. Think of it as a fortress with multiple defensive walls, where each layer contributes to survival inside the host. Peptidoglycan layer. Let us start from the innermost structural layer. Peptidoglycan layer provides rigidity and maintains the bacillus' rod-shaped morphology. Like other bacteria, it protects against osmotic lysis. So, this is the innermost layer, the peptidoglycan layer. Below it is the cytoplasmic membrane. However, unlike ordinary bacteria, the peptidoglycan of mycobacteria is covalently linked to the next layer, arabinogalactan. This linkage creates an exceptionally stable cell wall complex. Arabinogalactan is the second layer, covalent linkage this is. So, although beta-lactam antibiotics target peptidoglycan, M. tuberculosis shows limited susceptibility because of poor drug penetration and production of beta-lactamases. This is why routine penicillins are ineffective against tuberculosis. Peptidoglycan consisting of NAG and NAM, similar to bacteria in acetylglucosamine and in acetylmuramic acid with short peptide side chains. Now, next layer is the arabinogalactan, a complex polysaccharide, branched heteropolysaccharide made of arabinose and galactose. Major role is to act as molecular bridge between peptidoglycan and the mycolic acid layer. Why is this important? Because it anchors the thick lipid layer to the bacterial surface, giving remarkable structural stability. Drug correlation. This is also where ethambutol acts. Ethambutol inhibits arabinosyl transferases involved in arabinogalactan synthesis. Without arabinogalactan, proper cell wall assembly cannot occur, leading to inhibition of bacterial growth. So here the high yield exam point is ethambutol inhibits arabinogalactan synthesis. Next layer is the mycolic acid, the hallmark of mycobacteria. Now we reach the most important component. These are very long chain fatty acids that form an exceptionally thick, waxy outer layer, exceptionally thick. In fact, when people say M. tuberculosis has a waxy cell wall, they are primarily referring to this mycolic acid layer, long chain alpha alkyl beta hydroxy fatty acids with 60 to 90 carbons confer acid fastness and impermeability to many drugs. This is the mycolic acid arabinogalactan link, mycolyl arabinose. The waxy layer retains why this mycolic acid is important. These waxy layer retains carbylfunctin even after acid alcohol decolorization, producing the classical acid-fast reaction. Slow growth. The complex lipid-rich cell wall takes considerable energy to synthesize, contributing to the organism's slow generation time. Drug resistance. Mycolic acids greatly reduce permeability, preventing many antibiotics from entering the bacterial cell efficiently. Environmental survival, they also protect against drying, chemical injury, and environmental stress. Now, one of the most important anti-tubercular drugs, isoniazid, inhibits mycolic acid synthesis. Okay. Therefore, if you remember only one drug cell wall correlation, remember this: isoniazid inhibits mycolic acid synthesis and ethambutol inhibits arabinogalactan synthesis. This association is asked repeatedly in undergraduate and postgraduate examinations. Now, lipoarabinomannan, LAM, the next component is lipoarabinomannan. LAM is functionally comparable to lipopolysaccharide of gram-negative bacteria, although structurally very different. These are the LAM molecule, this light violet colored. Rather than stimulating an overwhelming inflammatory response, LAM primarily modulates the host immune system. These are the other lipids containing LAM also, glycolipids, phospholipids, ALM, and PIMs. Functions of LAM: inhibits phagosome lysosome fusion, suppresses macrophage activation, reduces oxidative killing, and facilitates intracellular survival. So, LAM allows M. tuberculosis not merely to enter macrophages but to survive and multiply within them. Now, what is PIM? Phosphatidyl inositol monocytes. or PIM. Although less frequently emphasized, these PIM is the red square. They less frequently emphasize. They are less frequently asked in undergraduate teaching, highly relevant at postgraduate level. They help in bacterial adhesion, interaction with host receptors, modulation of innate immune responses, and intracellular persistence. These molecules contribute significantly to the establishment of infections. Surface glycolipids and proteins. The outermost layer contains glycolipids, lipoproteins, and proteins that mediate interaction with host tissues. Many virulence factors are located here, including trehalose dimycolate, that is the COD factor. These molecules influence host immune recognition, granuloma formation, bacterial aggregation, and tissue damage. So, what are the clinical significance? Let us connect all these structural components with clinical practice. Acid fastness, the mycolic acid rich wall explains why Gill-Nielsen staining works. Reduced antibiotic permeability, the thick lipid barrier limits antibiotic entry, contributing to intrinsic resistance. Protection against desiccation, the waxy cell wall enables survival in dried sputum for prolonged periods under suitable conditions, contributing to transmission. Intracellular survival, LAM and other glycolipids inhibit phagosome maturation, allowing survival within macrophages. Intrinsic drug tolerance, even before acquiring genetic mutations, the cell wall itself provides natural tolerance by slowing drug penetration. Virulence, finally, the cell wall is the major virulence determinant of M. tuberculosis. It enables immune evasion, persistence, chronic infection, and granuloma formation. So, integrating the whole concept, I would like you to remember one sentence. The cell wall of Mycobacterium tuberculosis is simultaneously its armor, its shield, and its major virulence organ. Almost every important biological property of the organism originates from this remarkable structure. So, for a quick revision, peptidoglycan gives the structural rigidity. Arabinogalactan links peptidoglycan to mycolic acids. Mycolic acids gives acid fastness, impermeability, slow growth. LAM responsible for immune evasion, intracellular survival. PIMS host interaction and persistence. Surface glycolipids are proteins for adhesion, immune modulation, and COD factor. So from these slides, you can understand, you can answer the questions like why is M. tuberculosis acid fast, which antitubercular drug inhibits mycolic acid, which inhibits arabinogalactan synthesis, what is the role of LAM, why is M. tuberculosis intrinsically resistant to many antibiotics? How does cell wall contribute to intracellular survival? Why is tuberculosis treatment prolonged compared to many other bacterial infections? Name the major structural layers of the mycobacterial cell wall from inside outward. So, whenever you study the cell wall of the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, always remember one principle. Study it from the inside outward. This logical sequence will help you understand not only the structure, but also its functional significance. Now at the very bottom, now a cytoplasmic membrane at the very bottom of the diagram, this is the cytoplasmic membrane. Like other bacteria, it is a phospholipid bilayer containing numerous membrane proteins responsible for nutrient transport, energy generation, secretion, and synthesis of cell wall components. Many enzymes involved in the biosynthesis of the cell wall are anchored to this membrane. Thus, although it looks similar to other bacteria, it serves as the manufacturing platform for this unique complex cell envelope. Now, let us connect structure with function. So, after understanding every layer, let us ask a simple question. Why has nature designed such a complex cell walls? The answer lies in survival. This single structure simultaneously provides mechanical strength, resistance to drying, reduced permeability to antibiotics, acid fastness, protection against host immunity, intracellular persistence, long-term survival within granulomas, and enhanced virulence. Few bacterial pathogens possess such a multifunctional cell envelope. Integrated clinical correlation. When a patient receives isoniazid, we inhibit mycolic acid synthesis here. When we administer ethambutol, we disrupt arabinogalactan synthesis. When we perform Gill-Nielsen staining, we are exploiting the mycolic acid-rich cell wall. When macrophages fail to eliminate the organism, molecules such as LAM and PIM play a significant role. So you can appreciate that almost every important lab test, pathogenic mechanism, antitubercular drug discussed in tuberculosis microbiology ultimately revolves around this remarkable cell wall. I often tell students to remember the cell wall as a fortress with four defensive layers. Foundation is the cytoplasmic membrane. Brick wall is the peptidoglycan layer. Cement, arabinogalactan, and wax-coated armor, mycolic acids with LAM, PIMS, and glycolipids. So if you visualize this fortress, recalling the entire cell wall architecture becomes effortless. Draw and level the cell wall of the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. You can practice. And again, the same questions: inhibition by ethambutol, inhibition by isoniazid, acid fastness, cause, role of LAM, intrinsically why resistant to many antibiotics, and so on. So to enter the macrophage, survive inside it, evade the immune response, persist for years, and eventually transmit to another host. Those are M tuberculosis has one ultimate objective, that is to enter the macrophage, survive inside it, evade the immune response, persist for years, and eventually transmit to another host. This explains how each virulence factor contributes to achieving that objective only. So having understood the unique cell wall architecture, we can now appreciate why Mycobacterium tuberculosis is such a successful human pathogen. Virulence factors are the molecular weapons that enable a microorganism to establish infection, evade host defenses, survive within the host, and cause disease. Unlike highly invasive bacteria that produce potent exotoxins, M. tuberculosis causes disease through persistent intracellular survival and immune manipulation. Its success lies not in rapid destruction of tissues only, but also in its remarkable ability to coexist with the host for years, sometimes even decades. Now, what are the 5-step survival strategy of M. tuberculosis? I would like you to remember the virulence factors as part of a 5-step strategy. Number 1, enter the macrophage. Number 2, prevent intracellular killing. Number 3, manipulate the immune response. Number 4, persist within granulomas. And number 5, reactivate when host immunity declines. Every virulence factor contributes to one or more of these steps. Okay. Now, cod factor, that is the trehalose dimycolate. Let us begin with this most classical virulence factor. The name originates from the rope-like or serpentine cord arrangement seen in virulent strains grown in culture. However, cod factor is much more than a structural lipid. It plays several important biological roles. First, it promotes granuloma formation, which is the hallmark lesion for tuberculosis. Second, it induces the release of inflammatory cytokines, particularly the tumor necrosis factor, that is TNF alpha. Third, it contributes to tissue injury and helps maintain chronic infection. Earlier studies also suggested inhibition of phagosome lysosome fusion, although this process is now understood to involve multiple virulence factors acting together. So remember, cod factor is a major virulence associated glycolipid that promotes inflammation, granuloma formation, and persistence. Clinical correlation. This is why patients with tuberculosis often develop caseating granulomas rather than acute pus-forming infections. Lipoarabinomannan. The next major virulence factor is LAM. If the cod factor is the structural weapon, lipoarabinomannan is the immunological weapon. LAM suppresses macrophage activation, decreases production of reactive oxygen intermediates, interferes with cytokine signaling, and inhibits normal intracellular killing. As a result, the macrophage, which should eliminate the organism, actually becomes its shelter. Clinical correlation. This explains why M. tuberculosis is considered a facultative intracellular pathogen. Instead of being destroyed by macrophages, it survives and replicates within them. Now, ESX1 secretion system, including ESAT6 and CFP culture filtered protein 10. Now, let us discuss one of the most important discoveries in modern tuberculosis microbiology. The specialized protein secretion apparatus exports two important proteins, ESAT6 and CFP10. These proteins disrupt host cell membranes, facilitate intracellular survival, promote tissue invasion, and enable dissemination. They also contribute to immune modulation. Very high yield clinical pearl. Why is this important clinically? Because these proteins are absent in the BCG vaccine strain due to deletion of the RD1 region. Therefore, interferon gamma release assay, IGRAS, such as quantiferon TB gold test, use ESAT6 and CFP10 as antigens. Since BCG lacks these proteins, prior vaccination does not usually produce a positive IGRA. This is one of the most frequently tested postgraduate concepts. Sulfatides, the next virulence factor is sulfatides. Their major role is inhibition of phagosome maturation. Normally, after a bacterium is engulfed, the phagosome fuses with lysosomes to form the phagolysosome, where acidic enzymes destroy the microorganism, but M. tuberculosis blocks this process. Consequently, the bacillus survives within an immature phagosome due to presence of these sulfatides. So the macrophage builds a prison. Sulfatides prevent the prison doors from closing. The bacterium remains alive inside. This is the simple analogy. Antigen 85 complex. Next, this is actually a family of secreted proteins involved in mycolic acid transfer during the cell wall synthesis. In addition, these proteins bind fibronectin, facilitating bacterial attachment to host tissues. Because antigen 85 is highly immunogenic, it is also being investigated as a potential vaccine antigen. Now, thiocerol dimycoserosate, PDIM. This complex lipids forms part of the outer cell envelope. It helps the bacillus evade innate immunity by masking pathogen-associated molecular patterns, reducing immune recognition, and increasing resistance to host antimicrobial mechanisms. Recent experimental studies have demonstrated that strains lacking PDIM show significantly reduced virulence. So, putting everything together, now let us summarize. Imagine the life of the M. tuberculosis inside the lung. After inhalation, the organism is engulfed by an alveolar macrophage. Instead of being destroyed, LAM suppresses macrophage activation. Sulfatides prevent phagosome maturation. ESAT6 and CFP10 facilitate intracellular survival and tissue invasion. PDIM helps avoid immune recognition. Cord factor promotes granuloma formation and chronic inflammation. Antigen 85 maintains the integrity of the complex cell wall and contributes to host interaction. Together, these factors transform the macrophage from a killing cell into a protected intracellular niche. So, the clinical consequences of these virulence factors become obvious. They explain why they survive intracellularly, why it successfully evades host immunity, why infection becomes chronic, why granuloma formation is there, and why latent tuberculosis may persist for decades before reactivation. These are not isolated biological phenomena, they directly explain the clinical behavior of tuberculosis. Before we conclude, I would like to highlight one evolving concept. Modern tuberculosis research suggests that no single virulence factor is solely responsible for intracellular survival. Processes such as inhibition of phagosome maturation, immune modulation, and persistence result from the coordinated action of multiple molecules, including LAM, sulfatides, ESX1 proteins, PDIM, and other cell envelope lipids. This integrated view reflects our current understanding of M. tuberculosis pathogenesis and is more accurate than attributing each process to a single factor. Now that we understand that molecular weapon used by Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the next logical question is how does the organism actually establish infection inside the human body. In the next section, we will trace its journey from inhalation of infectious droplet nuclei to the development of granulomas, latent infection, and active tuberculosis. This is the central slide of the entire TB lecture. I recommend spending 10 to 12 minutes on it because once students understand this sequence, they can easily understand primary TB, secondary TB, latent TB, IGRA, Mantoux test, HIV-associated TB, and the rationale behind anti-TB therapy. My suggestion is don't simply read the flowchart, instead narrate it as the journey of Mycobacterium tuberculosis inside the human body. So far, we have discussed the structure of the organism, the molecular weapons that enable it to survive. Now, the next logical question is, how does Mycobacterium tuberculosis actually cause disease? The pathogenesis of tuberculosis is not a single event, but a carefully orchestrated interaction between the bacillus and the host immune system. One important concept must be remembered from the beginning. Tuberculosis is primarily an immunopathological disease. In other words, many of the clinical manifestations are not caused directly by the bacteria but by the host's immune response to the bacteria. Step 1 is the inhalation of infectious droplet nuclei. Transmission occurs almost exclusively through the airborne route. When a patient with pulmonary or laryngeal tuberculosis coughs, sneezes, speaks, or sings, tiny droplet nuclei measuring approximately 1 to 5 micrometers are generated. These particles are sufficiently small to remain suspended in air for prolonged periods and, when inhaled by another individual, bypass the upper respiratory tract to reach the terminal air spaces. So remember, it's a droplet nuclei, not large respiratory droplets that transmit tuberculosis. Droplet nuclei transmit tuberculosis through airborne route, not large respiratory droplets. Step 2 is the deposition in the alveoli. Once inhaled, the bacilli reach the alveoli, particularly in the well-ventilated regions of the lung. At this stage, the organism encounters the first line of cellular defense, the alveolar macrophage. Now, phagocytosis by alveolar macrophage. Under normal circumstances, macrophages engulf and destroy invading bacteria. M. tuberculosis, however, has evolved to exploit this defense mechanism. We have learned it already. The bacillus is phagocytosed, but instead of being destroyed, it begins to survive within the macrophage. So, is the macrophage protecting the host or protecting the bacterium? It becomes a protected niche for the bacillus. Intracellular survival and replication. This is the turning point in tuberculosis pathogenesis. Using the virulence factors such as LAM, sulfatides, ESX1 proteins, and PDIM, the bacillus inhibits phagosome maturation, interferes with phagosome-lysosome fusion, suppresses oxidative killing, and manipulates macrophage signaling pathways. Consequently, the bacillus replicates slowly within macrophages while remaining shielded from many components of the immune system. The intracellular location explains why successful treatment requires drugs capable of penetrating macrophages such as isoniazid, rifampicin, and pyrazinamide. Migration to regional lymph nodes is the fifth step. As infected macrophages and dendritic cells migrate to the hilar and mediastinal lymph nodes, they carry mycobacterial antigens. This marks the beginning of the adaptive immune response. Then activation of the Th1 immune response. Approximately 2 to 8 weeks after infection, antigen presentation activates CD4 plus T helper cells, lymphocytes. This is one of the most important events in tuberculosis immunity. Activated Th1 cells secrete what? Interferon gamma. Interferon gamma is the principal cytokine responsible for activating macrophages and enhancing their ability to kill intracellular mycobacteria. So, what are the important cytokines? Interferon gamma, the most important one in protective immunity, in protecting tuberculosis. Interleukin 12 produces mainly by macrophages and dendritic cells. It drives differentiation of naive T cells into Th1 lymphocytes, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF alpha, produced by activated macrophages. It is essential for recruitment of inflammatory cells, granuloma formation, maintenance of granuloma integrity. This explains why patients receiving anti-TNF therapy for autoimmune diseases have a markedly increased risk of reactivation of latent tuberculosis. This is very, very important. Now, what are the principal immune cells? Alveolar macrophages initiate the process. The response dendritic cells process and present antigen. CD4 positive Th1 lymphocytes orchestrate the protective immunity through cytokine production. And CD8 positive T cells contribute by killing infected cells and producing interferon gamma. Natural killer cells provide an early source of interferon gamma before the adaptive immune response is fully established. Now, the seventh step is the granuloma formation after activation of T helper cells, T helper Th1 immune response. Once macrophages become activated, they aggregate around infected cells. Over time, these organized structure develops into a granuloma. So, you can understand what is a granuloma. It consists of infected macrophages, epithelioid cells, Langerhans giant cells, surrounding lymphocytes, fibroblasts in chronic lesions, and often a central area of caseous necrosis. So think of the granuloma as a biological prison. Its purpose is containment rather than eradication. The immune system, tuberculosis actually uses host's immune system for its own protection. The immune system attempts to imprison the organism because complete elimination is often not possible. The granuloma protects both the host as well as the bacterium. It protects the host by limiting dissemination. It protects the bacterium by providing a niche where dormant bacilli can survive for years. Now, two possible outcomes. At this stage, infection follows one of two major pathways. Outcome 1, latent tuberculosis infection. If the immune response is effective, bacterial multiplication is controlled. The bacilli remain dormant within granulomas. The patient has no symptoms, not infectious, but retains viable organisms capable of future reactivation. Outcome 2, active tubercular disease. If host immunity is inadequate, granulomas fail to contain the infection, the bacilli. They multiply rapidly, caseous necrosis enlarges, cavities may develop, the patient becomes symptomatic and infectious. Now everything begins to connect. Why does HIV increase the susceptibility to tuberculosis? Because HIV depletes what? CD4 positive T cells, preventing effective Th1 response. Why do TNF inhibitors increases tuberculosis risk? Because TNF alpha is essential for maintaining granuloma integrity to contain the bacteria, confine the bacteria growth. Why does diabetes mellitus, diabetes increases tuberculosis risk? Because macrophage function and cell-mediated immunity are impaired. Why do malnutrition, corticosteroid, transplantation predispose to TB? Because they weaken cell-mediated immunity. So the entire story, let us summarize the complete sequence. Bacillus is inhaled, reaches the alveoli. Macrophages engulf it. Instead of being killed, it survives and replicates. Antigen presentation activates Th1 immunity. Interferon gamma activates macrophages. TNF alpha helps organize the granulomas. The infection is then either contained as latent tuberculosis or progresses as active disease if immune control fails. So everything we have discussed so far culminates in one fascinating structure, the tuberculous granuloma. In the next slide, we will examine how this granuloma is formed, why caseous necrosis develops, and why this hallmark lesion is both protective and pathological. Once you understand granuloma biology, the entire immunopathogenesis of tuberculosis becomes crystal clear. With that, we come to the end of today's session. Today, we explored the basic microbiology of Mycobacterium tuberculosis, its morphology, growth characteristics, cell wall architecture, virulence factors, pathogenesis. These concepts form the foundation of understanding tuberculosis in clinical practice and laboratory diagnosis. In the next lecture, we will continue with the laboratory diagnosis and drug resistance, etc. If you find this lecture helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more evidence-based microbiology lectures. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and goodbye. Thank you. See you in the next lecture.